last minute changes on our worship service. Young men will be leading the service this morning, and Tucker was down to lead the singing, and he's not able to be here this morning. But anyway, we'll get going here shortly, and we're glad everyone's here as we have this opportunity to study together. As you know, it's been announced that we'll be honoring the national leaders today. Brad and Wendy will be doing that at the end of the service, and we'll also be honoring our high school graduates at the end of the service as well. So we'll stay around a little bit longer after our service is over today to honor these young people. And we appreciate them, these young men leading the service, and we'll have a
and on the ground up here. It's one of those mornings where you had everything really organized and then it fell apart, so we're trying to do the best we can. I have some folks that aren't feeling well and folks that are we're making some changes to some things, but everything going really well. The books are not here yet. For those of you that needed some, they should be here before next week, so I apologize for that. But considering that we're only in chapter 5 this morning, I think we're going to be at this for a little while, so you have plenty of time to get caught up. All righty. How's everybody this morning? That wasn't very convincing. Everybody doing good? All right. I made note of this in the bulletin, and this is just going to be a reality for the next little while, I think. We've got more and more people that aren't comfortable being here, and it's understandable as we see, cases rise locally and nationally. And I just want to mention this briefly. And I know that most of you are not the people that are guilty of this, but that we have had some instances, and especially on social media and things where people are very interested in expressing and stating their opinions, whether you should have public assemblies, wear masks, don't wear a mask, and all those things. And I understand everybody's point of view, and I think that everybody is very much deserving of their own point of view and outlook on things. But I do want to encourage us to be as understanding and as loving and as accepting of other people's points of view as we possibly can be. If you don't feel like you need to wear a mask, but you see somebody else, don't make any judgments. Please certainly don't say anything smart. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do, and we're going to talk about wisdom, is keep our opinions to ourselves. And if you are wearing a mask and somebody else isn't, they're not intentionally trying to get anybody sick, of course. And so, let's not make any judgments about that. I went to Walmart yesterday for the first time in a very long time to get some diapers and such, and they have a big sign on the door that says masks required. And you go to Walmart and maybe a quarter of the people are wearing masks. It's one of those things that has become an issue. And so, we're not in the business of making judgments about that stuff. Unless you're a medical professional, I'm really not interested in your opinion about it, to be honest. And so, I think we just need to, do what we think is best to take care of other people, and that's it. And so I hope and like I said, none of you are guilty of that, but it's something that is being noticed, on social media and in people's comments and in conversations I've been a part of. And so I hope that we will take the lead in having the right kind of attitude and promoting a peaceful attitude about that. And so anyway, all I have to say about that, and I mentioned that a little bit in the bulletin as well. Lots of stuff going on today, so it's going to be an exciting day. But I want us to revisit something. And Will, if you don't care, actually, before we get into this, if you'll pull up the PowerPoint from last Sunday night, the one about wisdom. We mentioned this last week, and then we had a great discussion about it last Sunday night. And I kind of want to hear from you guys about it a little more. I was having a conversation with Dudley on Friday, and he brought something up in a way that I'd never thought about. And so I'm kind of interested to hear your opinions about this. We left off last week in chapter 4, and where it sort of left off. You open your Bibles, 1 Kings 4. We'll read this passage one more time. And these are the three things that are presented in our book, that wisdom is using knowledge to make the right choice, which I think is very much important, that seeking God, and thus if you're seeking God, you're seeking wisdom, and then skillfully doing what is pleasing to God. But these traits were interesting to me. I'm just going to put them all up there. Whoop, go back. Look at 1 Kings 4, and this is where we left off in our discussion last week. Said that God, in verse 29 of 1 Kings 4, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. And so I guess, we're thinking about that. And then we'll get to that in a minute. So when you think about wisdom, and we put these biblical concepts up here, and I'm just curious to hear your opinion on them a little bit, and we won't spend too much time on them, but accepting uncertainty. The Bible says that accepting uncertainty is a trait of wisdom. What do you think about that? This is your chance to give feedback on a sermon. Don't miss it, right? What do you think about accepting uncertainty? You think there's wisdom in that? Yeah, that's a humbling feeling. It is for me. I can't stand it. This idea there's something that's beyond my ability to control.
It helps me to submit more to God, to trust Him and leaning on Him instead of trying to figure things out myself and take control of that. By accepting the unknown, it helps me to submit more to Him.
Yeah. So I'm not the only one that's guilty of that. That's what I like to hear, Josh.
I agree totally with what's been said. Fear is one of the biggest drivers in our reality, or in our world. What you just talked about with the mask and the virus and stuff, I mean, that's a prime example of how fear can cripple society, cripple our existence. Being a Christian and assembling, going out and knocking on neighbors' doors. I mean, so if you don't know something, I mean, that fear can rule your life.
Yeah, and so the masks are interesting, and it's a perfect illustration, I think. Look, I don't know if a mask is going to stop the spread of a virus or not. I've heard debates back and forth, and I just don't know. But I do know this: does it not make us feel better? Now, some of you are saying no, but if just, if somebody comes up and they're coughing and they've got a mask on, it makes me feel, hey, they're trapping that cough. By the way, if I was somebody that invested money, this is a pro tip for you. I would be investing money in companies like Tic Tac and Breath Savers, because the first time people are smelling their own breath with those masks, and so. But anyhow, it gives us a feeling of the fact that that's something that we can control, right? And so if we wear that, or we see somebody else wear it, it gives that and I'm not interested in the validity of it for this illustration, but it gives us that feeling of, hey, we're doing something that we're in control of. Well, that's what we do with our lives, right? We try to figure out and regain control where we can, but sometimes there's just areas that are out of our control, Ken.
We used to have a saying in the restaurant business, when somebody would call one store and say, well, we got a problem. That's how it always starts. Your first thought is, how much is it gonna cost us?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's just like door knocking. I mean, that's, something a lot of people don't do because of the social pressure, the fear of knocking on somebody's door. Am I going to get shot? Are they going to say something ugly to me? So that fear, if we have that understanding that God's going to protect us and we're doing God's will, then it overcomes all that fear.
Yeah. And so, I think maybe learning to accept that is that wisdom. I have a friend that preaches near the Texas and Mexico border, and he posted just right as I was pulling up that all services are canceled because why? Why are services canceled down there right now? There's a hurricane, right? And he said the roads are all flooded leading to the building and they're without power. Is there anything they could have done to meet this morning? That's completely and totally beyond their control. Just like this virus, there was at first when churches started making the decision to close and not have services, there was widespread criticism. I got some calls about things, and that's okay because everybody was conflicted about it. I guarantee you that there were some elders in our meeting that did not want to close down services, and there were some preachers that didn't either. But then, once we started to realize that this was something that was going to be a lot bigger than we thought it was, then the decision, had to be made. And so, those are things that are beyond our control. We couldn't control a pandemic, unless we were over there in China stopping that guy from biting the head off the bat. If that's how it really started, then, that's beyond our control, right? And so I think we've just got to accept those things and learn to roll with the punches. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I hate that one. I wish I didn't have to put that on there, but I think the Bible makes that pretty clear to us. What about this one, accepting success and failure? Wisdom, accepting successes and failures. What do you think about that?
Well, it's just a part of life, isn't
Yeah. Yeah.
it? I don't know, it might be the getting older or whatever, but we're gonna fail in some stuff, we're gonna have success in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Hopefully the success outweighs the failure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it, at least for me, is learning to define success, right? We get caught up in the stuff, and I shared a quote in our men's devotional. It said that a lot of times we climb the ladder rung by rung to get to the top and realize that the ladder was leaned against the wrong wall. That a lot of times when we get to our destination, it's not what we thought the destination was going to be, right? And so learning to redefine our successes and failures, I think, is really important. But yeah, Terrell made a point. Hopefully, our success is going to outweigh our failure. But if you never fail in life, guess what that means? You didn't try. You didn't take a risk. You didn't take a chance. There are going to be areas that we fail. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and invest every penny you have in some business venture this afternoon. We need to make calculated risks, obviously. But I think learning to accept our successes and failures are important. Every really wealthy billionaire you've ever seen, guess what they've done at some point or the other? They've lost a lot of money. And so, we have to learn to be able to accept our successes and failures. And I think maybe the real wisdom is in moving on from those things, right? And learning to accept our successes and failures and evaluating and going back and looking at things as well. The third one, I don't want to spend too much time here, and I can't see the clock anyway. Here's the big one, learning to accept advice. Learning to accept advice. I actually want to read that proverb. I think it's Proverbs, 19:20. Proverbs 19:20. The NIV I think it's the NIV that I have this morning. Yeah, NIV says, listen to advice and accept discipline. And at the end, you will be counted among the wise. I want to hear what some other versions say there. New American Standard say, Mark.
Listen to advice and accept instruction that you may gain wisdom in the future.
Which version is that?
That's the NIV. No issue.
No, that should be something. That one I read was the NIV.
ESV.
ESV. Read it one more time. It said something different.
Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future.
Okay, yeah, you may gain wisdom in the future. I like instruction instead of discipline. There, we have a misunderstanding of the word discipline. When you hear the word discipline, what do you think? Yeah, getting a beating, right? Some of you weren't disciplined enough as a child. It shows, but and so, but we think about that. But that's not really what discipline is. Is a teaching moment, right? It's when we are disciplined to people, we look at that as a good thing, and so there's instruction involved. And so I think sometimes maybe just our connotations that we associate with the word discipline maybe make us misunderstand it. But I like instruction there. What do some other versions say in Proverbs 19:20? John, you got the easy to read? Pulled up?
KJV says, listen to counsel and receive instruction, that you may be wise in your latter days.
Okay. So notice there, it's a learning process. Both of those that we just read talked about, and here in the NIV it says in the end, so it's future learning that's involved in that. So if you listen to advice and you accept instruction, it might not make you smarter right that second, but it will in the future. Go ahead, John. Okay, yeah. So I think that's really important. Now, here's the really frustrating part about that is, are younger people usually willing to accept advice and instruction? No. When you get older, you are wise enough to learn to do that. But when you're younger and you should be listening, then you're not. And so it's sort of one of those things that is it's difficult to balance those, because so we have to be smart enough when we're young to accept that, but usually by the time we're smart enough to listen to advice, we're already kind of too old to implement some of it, right? So it's hard to do that. So accepting advice, and listen, I know just because somebody is old doesn't mean they're smart. I'm well aware of that. I've met some dum-dums that were 70 and 80 years old. I understand that. But every person that gives you some advice, there is something that you can glean from that. We use the illustration all the time. It's like eating fish, right? What do you do with fish? Y'all never ate fish before? What do you do with the bones?
Eat them.
You eat them? Well, there's somebody I'm not accepting advice from. You eat the meat and then do what with the bones? Spit them back out, right? And I know that's not all fish. I'm aware of that. But, it's that old expression about that you swallow the meat and spit out the bones. Well, when we accept advice from people, we obviously do that. But there's something we can learn in every piece of advice that we're given. It might be that, hey, I don't want to accept advice from this person. But there's something to be learned from. So if we'll just listen, like we talked about last week, that's important. Accepting character building goes right along with that. That we've got to be willing to have character built, right? And sometimes that's really difficult. What are some character building exercises that some of you have been through? I'm curious to hear this. Failure? Okay, in what way?
Well, I mean, it all goes together. I mean, you can't speak about any of these on their own.
Yeah.
I mean, the accepted advice and character building, if you're smart, that's going to come from failure.
Yeah.
Uncertainty, you can't just lay down and say, well, let's leave it in God's hands. That would be foolish.
Right.
You do everything that you can to plan for the uncertainty, so that when the worst case scenario happens, you're covered.
Right.
You can't just sit down and hope that things work out your way. Accepting success and failure, where you're always going to want success. Failure is going to come, but you're going to know to what degree you're going to leave yourself open, for the pain, so you can control that. The advice and the character building, that's going to come from the failure and from the things that you didn't plan from and the uncertainty. It all goes together. It all has to do with age. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about exclusion and brevity. As far as dying, that's something that I think of every single day, and I'll make a point to make something happen today that maybe possibly somebody will remember before when I am dead. Because when I'm dead, I'm not going to know I'm dead. It's not going to bother me. that love me that I leave.
Yeah, it's not going to bother us at all when you're
It's not
gone,
gonna
you know.
bother us, you know, but they all go together, but, accepting the advice is gonna keep you from the hard failures and will allow you to plan for the uncertainty and the character building. I mean, that's gonna come from how you handle the failures and the uncertainty. All of these have to do with who you surround yourself with.
Yes, yeah, and that's the next one, is exactly right. So, you know, character building from failures is exactly, what it is. So, you know, the first time, anybody ever been fired before? You don't have to tell me why. Anybody ever been fired? I haven't, and I joke with that. I've never been fired from a job. There were a couple times where I wish I would have, just so I could say what was on my mind. But I've never done that. But I might be one day. Might be from here. Might be from another job. Might be from a second job. It could be from anything. But how many of you have been fired multiple times? Okay. Was it easier the second time around? No. Did you know how to handle it a little better though? Yeah, of course, because we build character from those things, and whatever we've done and whatever we've experienced has helped build and develop who we are. And so, the first time, and this is not a failure so much, but the first time that you ever lose somebody in your life, it is completely devastating. And for some people, that happens at a very young age, and that's really hard. But as we get older and as we go through things, it's not that it doesn't hurt as bad, but we have the resilience and the tenacity to bounce back from those things easier. And so we're building character and we're building wisdom and we're advancing and we're growing through that pain. And so sometimes we have to go through things that are not fun. Mark always jokes about spending a summer cutting hay, but I guarantee you the first time you did that was probably pretty awful. But now as you do it, it's a lot easier to deal with, right? It's just part of work and it's part of it. Well, the same thing is true in any way in our life, and I think we have to learn to do that. James made reference to this, accepting exclusion, accepting surrounding ourselves with the right kind of people and the right people that are going to make us better and stronger. There's a ton of wisdom in that. And I think too sometimes, I want to say this in a very loving and gentle way. This is a crude metaphor, but it's just the one that I'm thinking of. If you think about cancer, when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you that you have cancer, what's the first thing that they start with? It's usually not chemo, it's usually not radiation. What is it? Surgery. To do what? We're going to cut it out. We're going to remove the tumor. We're going to go and we're going to do everything we can to remove that cancer from your body. And when you do that, there are many, many lives that have been saved in that way. And what can start out as a little bitty piece of skin cancer can grow and develop and turn into something that devastates and kills your body. Well, the people we surround ourselves with are the same way. That, sometimes when we cut people out of our lives, it can save us. And so we've got to make sure that we're people who are willing to do that and who have the wisdom and the intelligence to be around and surround ourselves with the right people. Any comments on that?
I think that goes along with what you said a while ago. That's one of the hardest ones for the younger people to accept.
Yeah, it is. I've had some discussions with people lately, and sometimes it's romantic relationships that are the hardest, right? We can't accept that we need to be with the person who will make us stronger rather than pull us down. And Jeremiah said, what does Jeremiah say about the heart? Anybody remember? That it's deceitful, right? The heart is deceitful. And so sometimes our feelings towards people and the strong feelings we have towards them can influence our ability to make rational decisions. Well, wisdom, which is not just knowledge, right? Because we can know something, but it's the ability to artfully and skillfully use that knowledge can really influence us and help us to make that decision. And so accepting exclusion and surrounding ourselves with the right, not necessarily the right people, but the right kinds of people do that. Comments? All right, and then the last one. Accepting the brevity of life. Accepting the brevity of life. James Maxwell made a comment a minute ago. He said he thinks about dying every day. Who else does that? Okay, you might not be willing to raise your hand. The people that do are the wisest people on this earth, that think about death every day. And I know immediately the first thought that comes to your mind when you say that is, that's pretty morbid. Walk around talking about dying all day. Well, somebody read Psalm 90 and verse 12 and listen to what the psalmist says. This is Moses, right? Psalm 90 and verse 12. Somebody read that when you get there.
So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom.
Teach us to number our days so that we may have a heart of wisdom. This is a prayer, by the way, of Moses. Let's just read it starting in verse 1. We've got to, for context sake. It says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. This next verse, I think I've shared this with you before maybe, but we had a gentleman that led prayer at the congregation I preached at before here. And every single prayer that he ever led started off with verse 2. He would say, Lord, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And he started every prayer. And you know what? I think that is very appropriate and very humble in beginning it that way. He grew up on the King James, though, so at the end he said, thou art God, of course. So, but before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. I have taught people to pray, by the way, using this passage instead of using the New Testament. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Don't we read that in the New Testament as well? What did Peter say about a day and a year and 1,000 years and all that? Remember that? 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is what? Like 1,000 years. Moses has influence there. He says, yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. And in the morning it springs up new, but by evening it's dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You've set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. And then, of course, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord. How long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Contextually, he's probably praying this prayer in the middle of where? Where do you think Moses would have prayed this prayer? In the wilderness, yeah. And probably when God makes the decree that generation of people will never enter the promised land. Seems like probably the context. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants. May your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. So what I'm saying is this. In the midst of sorrow and pain and thinking about death, there's great wisdom to be gained. Yeah, helps you make better decisions. It's strange, I guess. For me, I started preaching every Sunday when I was 23 years old. And, I was going to tell you, at 23, you're not thinking about death at all. I'll be 35 in a few months. At 35, you start thinking about it a little more. I guarantee you, at 45, you probably start thinking about it a little more. And at 55, and at 65, and at 75, and, some of you are sneaking up on 80 or already 80. And so I want us to be people who don't wait until we're old to think about the importance of life, because the reality is that not all of us will live to be older people. And if we are wise enough to prepare ourselves for the coming judgment, that's okay. I guarantee you there's not a person who's going to stand before God and say, God, I really wish I could have lived 2 more years instead of you taking me 2 years early. They're going to say, God, I'm so thankful that you have prepared this place for me and I get to spend eternity with you. And so understanding that there is something much better in the future than what we have now is very wise. And so I just thought those were really, really good, and going through and looking at this discussion about wisdom. And, I think the biggest compliment that you could ever give somebody is that they're a wise person. Wouldn't you agree with that? And so I think that the more we can learn about it and the more we can apply it and the more we can practice it. Isn't that the 3 steps to wisdom, really? Listening, knowing, and applying. And so if we can do those things, then we can be wise people. All right, let's go back to the other PowerPoint if we could. Anything else anybody wants to say about wisdom? Of course, this is a theme that's going to play itself out throughout the entirety of this book, but I thought that for introduction's sake, we should do that. So going back to chapter 3 for a minute, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people that were watching at home and different things about this Solomon's marriage to Pharaoh's daughter. I kind of came to the conclusion that God accepted it and it was okay, and people have disagreed with that, and that's okay. I want to read you the conclusion that was given here in the text about it. We're not obviously reading a lot of this book. I hope you're reading it at home. But this is what Michael says, and this is on the middle of page 68 if you have your book, about halfway down, page 68. He says, to be honest, I'm not sure what to think about Solomon. Marrying a foreigner, or worse, an Egyptian, does not square with Deuteronomy. Mention of multiple wives, a large stable of horses and chariots, and unparalleled wealth is meant to trigger remembrance of the admonition in Deuteronomy 17:14 through 20 that the king should not put his trust in such things. Yet the rest of this section goes on to describe with sincere admiration the glory of Solomon's giftedness and empire. As we continue to read Kings through the lens of Deuteronomy, we appreciate Conkle's observation. He's just a commentator that was used in there. And I think this is a good quote. He says, the problem for the Deuteronomist, i.e. the narrator of Kings, is the success of the kingdom is the very thing that makes it vulnerable to demise. While the statements about wealth and power may demonstrate the success of Solomon, they are also the point of his vulnerability. So, even though God describes the greatness and the wealth of Solomon, it's also sort of a call or a reminder, a warning to us that even though those things are wonderful, and even though those things are a blessing, that sometimes our biggest blessings make us the most vulnerable. I want you to hear what I just said. Sometimes our greatest blessings make us the most vulnerable. Somebody give me an example of what I mean by that. Sometimes our biggest blessings make us the most vulnerable.
Like if you get rich, yeah, that's great. There'll be no problems, but there's going to be problems later on in life. You're that way because some people are going to try to get, in a way, give you, get your pocketbook. You have to be careful.
Okay, yeah. So that's one example, and I think that's the example that we see here in some cases with Solomon, right? Is that that wealth, although it's wonderful, and by the way, it doesn't have to destroy your life, but it's a vulnerability, right? And so that's something to be aware of and be mindful of. What might be another thing?
Any kind of great blessing could potentially get you the wrong path.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll use John Painter, for example. John Painter is an extraordinarily handsome man, right? And so I'm sure that every day John has to fight women off at his job and when he goes to the grocery store and all those things because he remains dedicated to his lovely wife, who, by the way, they're celebrating their 19th wedding anniversary today, so happy anniversary. And so John's good looks, even though they're a blessing, can make him vulnerable, right? If you're an ugly person, you know what? You don't have to worry about people hitting on you all the time. And for a lot of you, that's a great blessing in your life. But, so, and John's right. Anything that is a great blessing for us makes us vulnerable. And so we have to be aware of that thing. Whatever we take the most pride in, that's what Satan's going to use to tempt us. And so we have to be aware of that. And just like Solomon's wealth and his greatness and his power and all those things were a great blessing. And I really believe they were a blessing from God because of Solomon's steadfastness in asking for wisdom. They also are what is going to cause the most problem. And so I'm not going to make any different conclusion about this marriage to Pharaoh's daughter, but obviously it makes things more difficult for him. We looked at chapter 4 last week, and we left off with this discussion about whether or not Solomon was the greatest king ever. And, we can't make any more definite conclusions about that, but we need to move on to chapter 5 for just a minute. 5, 6, and 7 are all going to go together. 1 Kings 5, 6, and 7. And what's going on here in 1 Kings 5, 6, and 7? What are we dealing with? Building up the temple, right? Let's look at chapter 5. Starting in the first verse. 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 1. How much time we have left here? Just a couple minutes. When Hiram, the king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys to Solomon because he had always been on friendly terms with David. Solomon sent back this message to Hiram. You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build a temple for the name of the Lord his God until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. In 1 Chronicles 28, there's actually a mention of this. Why was David not allowed to build the temple? There's actually a specific phrase that's mentioned by the chronicler. It says because David was a man of what? Of war and not peace. So because of David being a man of war and not peace, he was not allowed to build the temple. And so Solomon here is not necessarily, and the comment has been made lots of times that Solomon built the temple so that people could see how great Solomon was. Do you think that's his intent here? What's his intent? To glorify God, I think, first and foremost, but what else is he doing? He's completing the legacy of who? Of his father, David was a mighty, David Green's named after David. By the way, happy birthday to you too. Yesterday, right? How old were you?
68.
Oh man. We're given here this, that he's doing it, I think, twofold. David's right, to glorify God and to finish his father's legacy. And so people that say, well, Solomon just wanted to look big and powerful, and I don't think that's the intent originally. Now maybe it becomes that later on. He says, I intend, verse 5, therefore to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David when he said, your son, whom I will put on the throne in your place, will build the temple for my name. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I will pay you for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timbers as the Sidonians. So remember, Tyre and Sidon are always mentioned together, that they're one empire, and they are the ones that are well known throughout antiquity for having the cedar and juniper and providing the best lumber, and so they make a deal. And Hiram responds. We're not going to read the complete correspondence there, but Hiram responds, and and they go forward and they make the plans to build the temple. And then construction starts in chapter 6 and is completed in chapter 7. And then once we get to chapter 8, we're going to see the dedication of the temple. And so next week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 5, 6, and 7 all in one discussion. We're going to look at, I think I've got the picture here already. We're going to look at the construction of this temple, right? And we're going to look at the dimension. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but especially if you have the book, you'll have all this information already. We're going to look at what cubits mean in our modern understanding of size and try to put this temple into some kind of perspective so we can see its glory and majesty. And then hopefully at the end of next week, and maybe moving into 2 weeks from now, we're going to begin looking at chapter 8 and the dedication of the temple. Because as interesting as the construction of the temple is, I think chapter 8 is, in my estimation, one of the watershed moments in the history of the nation of Israel. It is a glorious moment, and it is the moment that moving forward, when they're going through troubles, that every Israelite's going to look back and remember. And it's every Israelite before, it's the moment that they were looking to as a place for God to dwell. This in 1 Kings 8 is one of the most significant moments in the entire Bible. And so hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to get through it and we'll spend some time there. Any questions or comments this morning? All right, thank you for your participation. Please continue to make comments. I'm so interested in hearing your perspectives and opinions as we go through and we try to glean some lessons from here. Thank y'all. See y'all next week.